Theme 3, Session 3, Tricky Syllogisms. Tricky syllogism, incidentally, is a type of syllogism that designed to trick you into doing something without realizing it. And that's accepting two false premises because you look at the conclusion that's valid and that's true, therefore, the premises you think must be true. That's invalid. And last session we discussed an example explaining why it is. The main thing is to remember is the ground rule, namely that if all the premises are true and the thought process is valid, then the conclusion will be right. Only then the conclusion will be right. We're building a science called volition. The etymology of volition is a Latin term volo, meaning I will, from the verb velle, meaning to will. And volition is defined as an act of willing or choosing. In view of the fact that the entire modern world of our physical technology is built upon standard of true plus validity, it's been that successful, then essentially we're saying, why don't we apply it also to the third science called volition? I think this would be a rational approach, but perhaps I should define rational. Rational means that it's rational, ladies and gentlemen, which is both true and valid. True and valid. Rational essentially means the same thing as absolute right in physics. In other words, rational means all the premises are true and the thought process is valid. A rational action is simply any action based upon true premises and valid thought process. A rational person is one who strives always to employ rational thought process. In other words, arriving at conclusion based on true premises and valid thought process. I'm repeating that and repeating, and still 99.9% of the population does not do that. To be rational does not mean, however, that you have to be 100% perfect. To be rational doesn't mean that you have to be a cold fish. Doesn't mean that you cannot express warmth or love or affection. A rational man or woman simply bases the important decisions of his life upon true premises and valid thought process. Everyone will make mistakes. Everyone will commit errors. How do you avoid error? Don't ever attempt anything. That's the biggest error you can make. If you do not do anything, you do not do mistakes, right? As a matter of fact, that's a great tragedy. Many people are so fearful of committing errors, they never do anything and their life becomes an endless error. Their whole life becomes an error because they're afraid of failure. A rational, striving individual, when he discovers that he is an error, will recognize that it always in his interest to rectify the error. An intellectual is simply one who always strives toward rationality. And I think this would be a good time to discuss the four types of intellectuals. It's very important to have a sharp line of demarcation among those four. The four types of intellectuals are the genuine intellectual, the pseudo-intellectual, the part-time intellectual, and the compartmentalized intellectual. The genuine intellectual, although not perfect, he may or may not have gone to school, but in any event, he strives to base his conclusions on true premises and valid thought process. He may or may not have gone to school. I repeat that. The pseudo-intellectual, very common type. The pseudo-intellectual may have the external trappings or facade of intellectualism. He may have, for example, a sophisticated esoteric vocabulary that he commonly uses. He may have all the proper buzzwords. If you ask him to define his terms, though, he'll commonly come unglued. The pseudo-intellectual, for example, may have this posture. He is always trying to impress you with his academic credentials. You may walk into his office and the walls are smeared with diplomas and certificates of every shape and variety and size, perhaps even all properly framed in a non-glare glass. Now, do not misrepresent what I said simply because a professional, for example, has diplomas on his office wall doesn't mean that he is a pseudo-intellectual. I did not say that. I did not say that. I did not imply that. But the more an intellectual or the more an individual seeks to impress you with his academic credentials, the more he makes of it, the more likely he is, and you're dealing with a pseudo-intellectual. For example, genuine intellectual in the field of the physical science was Albert Einstein. You look up a book by Einstein, turn to the title page perhaps, and it doesn't give the title of the book written by her professor, Dr. Albert Einstein, PhD, Dr. This honorary degree that would take pages and pages and pages to list, perhaps. All it says in the title of the book, it's by Albert Einstein. At least all the ones that I've seen. From that, you would even know he went to kindergarten. And if you can develop the theory of relativity without going to school, it's irrelevant, isn't it? All right. Then we have the compartmentalized. I have problems with this word, intellectual. Albert Einstein was one of those. That's very common among the physical scientists. They use their knowledge of rightness on a compartmentalized basis. And either they believe, well, you cannot apply this outside of physics, which is a common position among those of the physical sciences, so they don't even try. Or if they think it can be done, they will admit that they don't know how to do it. Although most of them would say, you cannot do it. You definitely cannot do it. In the field of the physical science, Albert Einstein was one of the giant intellectuals of all time. But outside of the physical sciences, he didn't apply truth and validity as a standard effectively. So we have the four types of intellectuals: genuine, pseudo, part-time, compartmentalized. It's important to recognize that the standard of rightness, truth plus validity, is simply an intellectual tool that's employed to discover the nature of the universe. There's a very practical reason to use the tool. Gets results. You simply cannot build anything useful on a false premise. You cannot build anything useful on an invalid thought process. You can do it. You cannot do it. Nobody can do it. It's never been done and never will be done. So forget it. The only reason to forget it is because you cannot do it. Let's put some precision now into the term. Term wrong. Wrong implies that this is not right. Not right implies either the premises are not true or the thought process is invalid, or both. The standard of rightness based upon truth and validity is an absolute standard. That means it's independent of your likes or dislikes. A standard of rightness in physics has a mountain of collaboration to support its position as a true absolute. The entire modern world of technology is a derivative of the most useful standard. Incidentally, if one rejects the standard of true plus valid equals right, then to be honest, you should reject everything built on that standard. Turn in your television set, the refrigerator, the automobile, the pop-up toaster. All of these are derivatives of true plus valid equal right. Well, the next important question is, will it work effectively outside of physics? Can you use the same standard in the social domain? Can you use this to determine when a man's actions are right? Can we extend the absolute standard of rightness in physics to the social domain? The concept of rightness works in physics well. Physics, of course, is a subject that deals with the nature of physical phenomenon. And because the phenomenon is physical, it's easier to make predictions about physical phenomenon. Physics is the simplest subject. For example, if a stone is at rest and it has no outside forces acting upon it, it will remain where? At rest. If the stone moves, there only one reason can be. There is some force or forces acting upon the stone. And if we know the forces acting upon the stone, we can predict, for example, where and when the stone will land or where it's going to be at a given time. In physics, we can make accurate predictions about future events if we know the forces. Forces, I mean the acting upon a stone or whatever it is. We can predict where it will be at a given time. We can make predictions of lunar eclipses, solar eclipses with amazing accuracy. Try to predict a man. Try to predict what man will do, where it will land, when it will jump, or when he, not it, will run, stop, sleep, act. So, yes, the science we're talking with you about right now is much more difficult than the physical sciences. And that's why we have physical sciences well developed. I don't want to say we're even 10% knowledge of the whole universe, but it's relatively well developed. And the science of volition lagging behind. But if we will not make it work, if we will not understand the rules, if we will not understand the laws, if we will not understand how to implement them, we will be using our knowledge in physical science, and we will destroy ourselves. So better start thinking and learning. Until next time.